I'll start by introducing myself again. My name is Chuck Diaz. I happen to be an American of Mexican descent. I'm not a Mexican American, I'm not a Latino, and I'm not a Hispanic. Those seem to have come along after I was raised, because I was raised to be an American first. Thank you very much. I happen to have been born and raised in South Central Los Angeles, where they had the riots last year. And I wrote an article in Speak Up America about it, where I said that the good people of South Central Los Angeles did not riot. Only thugs and criminals rioted. But the media wanted us to believe that it was an insurrection by the good people of South Central Los Angeles. In an effort to find out some of the truth, I contacted the 77th Street Police Station and found out from the police officers there, and by the way, the 77th Street Police Station was where I used to get my bicycle license plates. The Revolutionary Communist Party headquarters is on 49th and Vermont, which is about 10 blocks, maybe 12 blocks away from where the center of all this action was. The Communist Party in Los Angeles was very active during the riot. If a rock didn't get thrown by somebody, they threw it. They were passing out flyers that had America spelled with a KKK instead of a CA. And so there was an awful lot of things that the media did not report. That's kind of what I found out before I started Speak Up America. I started Speak Up America originally. I dedicated it to the return of common sense in our laws, a return of morality in our decisions, and the elimination of any obscenity reaching our kids. When I started Speak Up America, I had written an article that was published in the local Tucson newspaper opposing affirmative action in H.R. 1. I don't believe in affirmative action. I don't believe that because I happen to be an American of Mexican descent that I need anybody's help to do anything. I think I've got the brains to do whatever I need to do. Apparently people like Ted Kennedy don't believe that. They think that they have to give us crutches, and I don't buy that at all. Anyway, when I found out that at the root of the problem basically was the media, in the way they would report things, like, for an example, in the LA riots, they didn't tell you anything about any communist activity. They wouldn't even call the people that were rioting thugs and criminals. You know, and I say, if you can't call someone who is a thug or a criminal because he's black, then you're the racist. All right? Or if he's a Mexican, you're the racist if you can't call him a thug or a criminal when he's doing something like that. But anyway, we all know what happened to O.C. Mills, John Potsky, and Bill Ellen. They literally have been sentenced to time in jail for doing things like O.C. Mills and his son discharging pollutants onto the land. John Potsky, he violated the Clean Water Act, and Bill Ellen was in charge of a construction of actually a wildlife sanctuary. He ended up, he is now serving 6 months in jail. In reality, the mills dumped 19 loads of clean builder sand on a lot less than a third of an acre that they owned. John Potsky was an immigrant from communist Czechoslovakia. He bought some land across the street from where he was working as a mechanic. And on that land there were rusted cars and tires, etc., etc., etc. He purchased it because he thought that he would expand his business. He cleaned the rusted car parts off the cars and the tires, and it rained. And when it rained, it would fill up next to his land because of the tires, etc., etc. They claimed that that was a navigable water, and he violated the Clean Water Act when he filled it in with clean fill dirt. He served 3 years. Well, he's out now, but he was sentenced to 3 years and a $202,000 fine. His average income had been $20,000. He came from communist Czechoslovakia to get away from that kind of government. Okay, Bill Ellen is now in the serving 6 months, and I won't go into that. One of the reasons that the reason that the environmentalists picketed me in Salt Lake City was for me making this statement here. The environmental movement has and is killing more human beings on Earth than Hitler did and all the worlds in all of history. And now that's a heck of a statement to make. Okay, but then you should have some proof to back it up. I've got my proof from the people that I want to believe, like Dixie Lee Ray, like J. Gordon Edwards, and some of the true scientists. This is what came out in the Salt Lake City Tribune. Experts refute anti-environmentalist charges. It seems like whenever we come out and say anything about anything that the environmentalists disagree with, we turn out to be the anti-environmentalists. Whenever we say anything, they don't just report what we say, they go out and find somebody to refute what we say. If that would have been a Sierra Club member saying that there's an ozone hole over Salt Lake City, they wouldn't have gone out and checked with anybody. They would have just said, Sierra Club reports ozone hole over Salt Lake City. And that's the media for you. They don't really give you an unbiased objective report. Later on, in January, that was back in October, in January 11th of Newsweek, they had an article about the endless plague. And this is really where I'm going to start my talk, which is going to be about how the mother of all hoaxes started a movement that ended up with you people here. Because you're here for many reasons. But the reason you're here, the first domino that started this whole thing, or better yet, the first domino that allowed the environmentalists to raise the money that they could do to cause the havoc that they have in the last 20 odd years, was when they got DDT banned. Now, I'm sure everybody's aware of the fact that back in 1972, the EPA banned DDT use in the United States. Since then, the environmentalists have tried to get it banned in the rest of the world. They've succeeded in some ways, and not in others. Prior to the use of DDT, there were millions and millions of people that had died since day one from that little malaria mosquito. The mosquito brings us malaria, encephalitis, elephantiasis, yellow fever, a whole raft of things. And ever since people were walking, they have been fighting the mosquito. And the mosquito has won most of the battles, to be very frank with you. Then DDT was created, invented. It was patented in the late 30s. And in the early 40s, they started using DDT. And to date, through the proper use of DDT, not one human being has died. And yet they banned it. Okay? In places like Sri Lanka, they reduced the malaria cases down from something like 2 to 4 million a year down to, at its lowest, 17 cases were reported, I think, in 1963. After the banning of DDT, the malaria cases in Sri Lanka are back up to a couple of million. So that J. Gordon Edwards and Dixie Lee Ray both have written in their books or in scientific reviews that 8 million deaths per year are happening right now because of malaria. Okay? And DDT could have definitely solved that problem. There were 4 major factors why DDT was banned. I got 3 of them right here. One was Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. The second is the Audubon Society, the Sierra Club, and the 4th was the Environmental Defense Fund, which was created by a grant from the Audubon Society back then. That was their first action, was to see whether or not they could raise money by suing the EPA on DDT. I just happened to ask one of the people here in this conference who has been a farmer and a rancher if he used DDT, and he told me that he did. That we were talking about it last night. He said there was an instance when he was a teenager when one of the farmers had mixed a big wash tub full of DDT in the proper amount, okay, water and DDT and whatever else they put in it, and had left it for whatever reason. He had to go somewhere, and a cow walked by and drank the whole bucket or the whole wash tub. Nothing happened to the cow, okay? Not one thing. They have given human beings DDT in their food at the rate of something like 35 to 100 times the daily amount, or the yearly amount, pardon me, per day for 2 years. Nothing has happened. In Rachel Carson's book, she said things like, the robins are disappearing as a result of DDT. This is the Audubon Society Christmas count for the years of 1941 and 1960. Right down here we have the robin. The Christmas count in 1941 was 4,214. The Christmas count in 1960 was, the robin count was 19,616 in 1941, 928,639 in 1960. Now those were the years of the heaviest DDT use, okay? And there was an increase of I don't know how many 100% on the robins. Just about every bird that she talked about in her book, that was the situation. They talked about thinning eggshells for the eagles and some of the hawks. And then when you look into the way they did the tests, they did not just give them tests with DDT. They included a bunch of other things that were known to thin eggshells, and then they blamed it on the DDT. All of these things that I'm telling you right now were presented in the hearings that were held by the EPA to determine whether or not DDT should be banned. One of the things that were said by an Environmental Defense Fund scientist is that they had found an average of 13 pounds per acre of DDT on Long Island. This guy's name is George Woodwell. This happened back in 1972. About 4 months ago, when I heard about this, I called him up. He's working up here at Woods Hole. I have it on tape. And I asked him if he said that, and he said, no, I didn't say that. And I said, well, what is it that you said? And so he started giving me a song and dance about things, but basically prior to the hearings, they did say this. But the reason that he's denying it right now is because during the hearings, they questioned him and questioned him and questioned him. Finally, he admitted this, that the samplings were deliberately biased in order to find the highest residues we could find, because at the time we wondered whether we could find any residue. Okay? Now this is the science. And then I asked him if he said that, and he said, yes, I did say that. Okay? And like I said, I talked to him on the phone. Throughout the sampling, the scientists were sampling areas where the DDT was mixed, and they were loaded onto the spray trucks, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, you can do whatever you want science-wise, and if you know that they've been mixing DDT over there and you take your samples over there, you're going to get a high concentration of DDT. And if you're going to be the kind of scientist that puts that out, and some of you last night watched a video here called The Greenhouse Conspiracy, and you know darn good and well that these people are looking for funding, and if they can come out with some kind of a crisis or a catastrophe, the odds are they're going to get their funding. And that's the bottom line, funding. Follow the money. During the hearing lasted 7 months. There were 150 scientists that were brought before the panel. The hearing examiner's conclusion was, DDT is not carcinogenic, mutagenic, or teratogenic to man, and these uses of DDT do not have a deleterious effect on fish, birds, wildlife, or estuarine organisms. Well, if the hearing examiner came out with that conclusion, how come they banned DDT? William Ruckelshaus overruled that decision. William Ruckelshaus was the EPA examiner, or administrator. He was the head of the EPA when it started. He overruled it. He had never read the transcript. He admitted that he'd never read this transcript. He never attended any of the meetings, but he overruled it. All right? Because he has the power to overrule it. Since then, he has done work for the Environmental Defense Fund. He has, now he's a vice president for Weyerhaeuser. I don't know what the heck he's doing there. But he's admitted that his decision was based on political, not scientific reasons. The EPA can do some good or can do some bad. The fellow that followed him is a fellow by the name of Russell Train. Russell Train banned dieldrin, another chemical. Okay? He banned it and when he did so, he did it on his own without any consultation from anybody else, and he overruled the Pepper Committee from the FDA in 1965, the Jensen Committee from the National Academy of Sciences in 1965, the Gunther Committee for the FDA again in 1967, the Committee of Agricultural Research from the USA in 1969, the Wilson Committee, from, which is a British Department of Education and Science Committee in 1969, the Mark Commission from the Department of Health and Welfare in 1969, and the 1974 Food and Agricultural Committee, which all said dieldrin is not a carcinogen. So what did he do? He redefined a carcinogen to include non-cancerous tumors. All right? Therefore, by redefining it, he now claimed that this was carcinogenic, so he banned it. Russell Train's a tax attorney, okay? And he was the head of the EPA, and he's making scientific decisions that redefine things. So when they banned DDT, and now we've got 8 million people a year dying again, what do we do about it? We give an annual Rachel Carson Award, okay, in honor of her great book, Silent Spring, in honor of the fact that she was the start of the mother of all hoaxes, in honor of the fact that the environmental community learned that they can get to the people of the United States from emotional issues without any scientific fact, and they can fleece your pockets, okay? Because we are an emotional people. We believe things. Hell, we believe John Wayne should get the Congressional Medal of Honor, and he never fired a bullet at an enemy in his life. He's a hell of an actor, and I love his films, and I've seen every one of them, but I'll be damned if we all don't think he's a hero. All right? He said what someone else wrote, and he did what someone else directed, but we think he's a hero. Today, soap opera stars can go visit a shopping mall, and there are people that'll walk up to the guy that plays the doctor on the soap opera and say, "Doc, my hip is bad. You know, can you help me?" All right? I mean, that's the kind of people we are, okay? So when they found that out, they said to themselves, boy, have we got a way here. All we got to do is touch that little hot button on these people, and they'll just empty their pockets, and that's exactly what they've been doing for 20 years. Let's see what our old friend, Senator Gore, now Vice President Gore, has to say about this DDT issue and Rachel Carson. On page 3 of his book, Earth in the Balance, he says, quote, "Our farm taught me a lot about how nature works, but lessons learned at the dinner table were equally important. I particularly remember my mother's troubled response to Rachel Carson's classic book about DDT and pesticide abuse, Silent Spring, first published in 1962. In an issue of Speak Up America a few months ago, I said, Rachel Carson lied. His mother believed it. She passed it on to him. He became a senator. Now he's the head of the Green Movement in the United States. He wrote a book to prove it. We have a senator that wrote a book on science, okay? So basically, what I'm asking is who in the heck speaks for science? If we're listening to all these things, and all these things are happening to get all this money, to do all this regulatory junk, who speaks for science? There was a time when the true scientists used to live by one theory definitely. All things are poison, none without poison. Only the dose determines that a thing is not poison. When we say that all things are poison, we mean all things are poison. If you consume too much of anything, something in that thing will kill you. I don't care if it's lettuce or turkey, okay? A guy drank 19 liters of water in Europe, died. Too much water, okay? But the scientists seem to be going after, the environmentalists seem to be going after one thing, synthetic pesticides. That's what they're going after. They're saying that synthetic pesticides are carcinogenic, even though they've redefined what the word cancer-causing means, okay? So now we got to live with that, okay? But they're only going after synthetic pesticides. You ever wonder why? Carcinogens occur naturally in 57 food varieties in quantities thousands of times greater than in a lot of the synthetic pesticides. So if we have this thing that occurs naturally in a broccoli, let's say, and it's this much, and we've got this much synthetic man-made residue in it, how come we're nailing the man-made residue instead of this one here? They completely overlook the natural carcinogenic materials because they're trying to tell you, well, there's a difference between that kind of cancer-causing thing and this kind of cancer-causing thing. And I don't think anybody in science believes that. Cancer is cancer. Cancer-causing is cancer-causing. All right? But at the same token, if they're going to complete their mission in scaring the hell out of us, they have got to say something. The problem is that they're using our own technology against us. In other words, the number 0 is disappearing. You know, one of these days, 0 is going to go away completely. Because of our technology, we can measure things in smaller and smaller and smaller quantities. Okay? They just lowered the atrazine level in water recently to 0.02 parts per million, I think it is. 0.02 parts per million of atrazine is the equivalent of a half a teaspoon in 2,500 15 by 30 swimming pools. Okay? I could put a gallon of arsenic in the darn thing in that much water and drink it, but they're going to tell you, if you go a little more atrazine than that, it's cancer causing. I'll tell you what, if the Federal Aviation Agency ran their operation the way the EPA runs its operation, one thing's for sure on your airline ticket, they would put at least, flying may be hazardous to your health. Okay? So anyway, the bottom line is that the dose makes the poison, and because an uneducated populace doesn't know a lot of this, because an uneducated populace doesn't know that, or better yet, doesn't have the time to find out these kind of things, because they don't know that you can die from something that's in turkey. And if Ted and Jane on their TBS channel wanted to put an end to turkey eating, they could honestly come out and tell you that turkey can kill you. The only problem is you got to eat 3.8 tons of it at one sitting. Okay? But they don't tell you that. All they tell you is the fish are poison. All right? The next big scare was the Alar apple scare in 1989, pardon me. During that scare, Alar, by the way, was a growth regulator. It kept the apple on the tree a little bit longer, it firmed it up, and it really wasn't a pesticide, really. It was a growth regulator. But the National Resource Defense Council decided, we're going to see what we can do with this thing and how much money we can raise. And by God, they sure as heck, they sure as heck did that. What they came out with is that Alar, a residue of Alar, and I don't want to get too technical here, but it's DMH something something, a residue of Alar was carcinogenic. They said that they had tested some laboratory rats. That's true. They said that the laboratory rats formed tumors. That's true. So what they didn't tell you is that they gave the laboratory rats the equivalent of a human being eating 28,000 pounds of apples per day for 70 years. That's how much of the Alar residue was injected into these rats, and that's how they got the tumors. What they didn't tell you also is that when they cut it in half to only 14,000 pounds per day for 70 years, no tumors. Okay? All right? Now, when they decide to do this kind of thing, they don't just do it, haphazardly. They do it with a plan. In this case, their plan was to hire a fellow by the name of David Fenton. I don't know if he's still here in Washington, but David Fenton is a 60s hippie. I guess there's one guy, at least, in the United States that would probably call him a long-haired, maggot-infested, dope-smoking hippie. He was a Washington publicist, okay? He formed an organization called Fenton Communications. Some of Mr. Fenton's former clients were the Christic Institute, the government of Jamaica under Michael Manley for $372,000 a year plus an estimated $225,000 in expenses. The government of Grenada under Maurice Bishop, the government of Greece under Andreas Papandreou, the People's Republic of Angola at $180,000 a year plus expenses, and the Sandinista regime in Nicaragua. His assignments were to develop and carry out information strategy, including contacts with influential editors, reporters, producers, anchormen, columnists, and news media executives in the United States. Okay? He was hired by the NRDC to orchestrate the LR scare. One of the people that he hired or recruited, because he knows that we believe John Wayne should be given the Medal of Honor, was Meryl Streep. And I'll never forget watching her in Congress crying out in her Academy Award-winning way, "What are you doing to our children?" Okay? And because the environmentalists found out a couple of things. One of our hot buttons is by God, if it's good for the kids, we're going to do it. If it's bad for the kids, we're not going to do it. And if the kids don't work, then we're going to try pregnant women. If it's good for pregnant women, we're going to do it. If it's bad for pregnant women, we're not going to do it. So they push those buttons constantly until they feel the pulse of the nation and say, we got them hooked. Now let's reel them in. Okay? This one netted the NRDC something like $40 million in donations in a very short time. He also created, with Meryl Streep and Tom Brokaw's wife, good old Channel 4 Tom Brokaw, or pardon me, NBC Tom Brokaw, 4 in our town. They created a group called Mothers and Others for Pesticide Limits. I have been trying to find Mothers and Others for pesticide limits in Washington, in New York. Wherever I go, I ask, is there a Mothers and Others for pesticide limits in this town? And I haven't been able to find one yet. Okay? They did it for that TV segment that was taken on the White House steps. And then it never went beyond that. They were interviewed on Donahue. They were interviewed on every major television program you can talk about. At the height of the LR scare, there was one mother who, watching TV in the kitchen, raced to the phone, picked up the phone and called the police to stop the bus that her child was on going to school to take the apple out of the lunch that she had inadvertently put in there. Okay, and that's a fact. And that's how emotional these things can get. It all happened because 60 Minutes, that wonderful, truthful program, 60 Minutes, that wonderful, honest, always tells the truth program, 60 Minutes, aired the LR thing about killing kids. Okay, prior to that airing of that program, they were notified by Reed Irvine of Accuracy in Media because he wanted to make sure that they knew that the EPA findings had said, hey, that's not true. Our own tests say no. I mean, this is the EPA, who normally wants to ban everything, right? And they're saying, it's not true, it's not true. They aired the program anyway because they know that we like the good scare stories. The real truth is that the NRDC and NCBS made a deal that the report would not be shown to anybody prior to the airing. Now, we have another thing here in science that has kind of been overlooked. Not kind of, quite a bit. In the old days, science was peer review. I used to work for a company in Newport Beach in California, Aeronutronics. They were a think tank, and they unfortunately got a production contract for a Shillelagh missile, which was an anti-tank missile fired from a tank. But it was up on a hill up above Newport Beach, a big building, and it was like a campus. I was a production guy, and they hired me because they had a production contract. But these people seemed like Martians to me. I mean, they had like a football field, a baseball diamond, a pool room. They had a barbershop. They had a library. And whenever you got too uptight while you were working, hell, go down there and throw a football around every once in a while. Go shoot some pool or something like that. It was one of these kind of places where a scientist would run to Washington and come back with a grant, and he'd lock himself up in his room for 3 years, and he'd come back out, and he would say, well, I've just discovered the effects of Martian atmosphere on Swiss cheese or something like that. But it was that kind of a thing. But the main thing is that whenever they came out with anything, they would turn it over to peer review. And other scientists would take a look at it. And they'd test it upside down, sideways, and all this kind of stuff like that. And then they'd say, yep, you're right. Or, nope, you're wrong because on the 999th test it didn't do the same thing. That was peer review, okay? They don't do that anymore. They make deals with 60 Minutes to get it on the air so that the people will buy it, the media verifies it, then the peers get a hold of it, takes them 5 years to find out that it's false, and by then it's too late. They've collected their money or they've got the regulation into effect. This is the NRDC's latest plea for money. On it they have listed all of the wonderful things that the NRDC has done over the years to help our environment. One of the things that is not listed there is the LR deal. Right now they are being sued by the Washington apple growers. The Washington apple growers lost over $200 million that year, and they're being sued right now in Washington. CBS, the NRDC, and 60 Minutes are being sued for that. Along with some of the things that have happened with NBC lately, I think the American public might be receptive to some of these things. So basically what has happened, we have created what I call the media scientist. And who is the media scientist, or at least what does he believe in? We saw a real good one last night on that video that I showed. But basically, the media scientist rejects the dose determines the poison. They subscribe to any amount is unacceptable. They reject peer review. They release to the media first, and they believe that the cause is more important than the truth. And I'll show you something to that effect here in a minute. And they are basically an activist with an agenda. And I say that any scientist with an agenda is not a scientist. Okay? And that's all there is to it. Last night, the #1 leading proponent for global warming in the United States is a fellow by the name of Stephen Schneider. Okay? He is quoted as saying, "We need to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination. That, of course, entails getting loads of media coverage, so we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified, dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts we may have. Each of us has to decide what the right balance is between being effective and being honest." The balance between being effective and being honest. I guess if I want to be more effective, I should lie a little bit more. Because that's exactly what this guy, I mean, some of the things that he said last night. He was also one of the scientists that 15 years prior was telling us that there was an ice age coming. Okay? And he was trying to get his grants because of an ice age. When he was approached with that in the documentary last night, he said, "I don't see any problem in saying people learn. I'm not embarrassed about the view I had a decade ago." I forgot to put the word ago there. But in other words, this guy, well, yeah, that was then and today's now. You know, I mean, this guy's a scientist. When he was confronted with the evidence, that proves that there is no global warming happening, his answer was, "I don't put very much stock in looking at direct evidence." Now, the people that were here last night saw the video. That's exactly what he said. When they finally presented him with the data that said there is no proof that any global warming is happening, that was his response. Okay? Let's see what some of these other people have to say. There's an organization called, darn, I always forget their name, Physician Sciences and Concerned Scientists and Physicians or something like that. They're always on CNN. CNN uses them, the Union of Concerned Scientists, that's right. They're always on CNN. They are the only ones that CNN will call in and say, "Here's our expert," okay? Helen Caldicott is a member of that organization. She's one of those experts, and here's what she says. "Scientists who work for nuclear power or nuclear energy have sold their soul to the devil. They are either dumb, stupid, or highly compromised. Free enterprise really means rich people get richer, and they have the freedom to exploit and psychologically rape their fellow human beings in the process. Capitalism is destroying the earth. Cuba is a wonderful country. What Castro has done is superb." Okay? Now that's one of those experts that they have on TV. One of the founders of Greenpeace. Okay? "It doesn't matter It doesn't matter what is true. It only matters what people believe is true. You are what the media define you to be. Greenpeace became a myth and a myth-generating machine. Before I continue to the next one, I want to just tell you about that myth-generating machine. Mr. McTaggart, who took the company over after this guy here and ran it for the last 20 or so years, is now retired on an olive farm in Italy. He's got a few $1 million in the bank, too. He was the executive director of Greenpeace. Now, how in the heck do you imagine that he got a few $1 million in the bank and bought an olive farm in Italy? And why do you think he's living on an olive farm in Italy? Well, I guess the IRS and all those kind of people can't touch him over there, and his bank accounts are certainly not in the United States, all right? But also, one thing you won't see in the media is, for an example, about a year ago, in Oslo, Norway, Greenpeace was found guilty of using fraudulent methods in the creation of their Baby Seal movie, okay? They were found guilty in a court of law. Greenpeace did not contest the decision. Last October, Greenpeace shut their operations down in Norway. The executive director of Greenpeace Norway said, and I can't quote it, but I'll paraphrase it here. He said to the effect, Greenpeace is nothing but a jet-setting environmental something organization. And that's all they are, okay? This was the executive director of Greenpeace Norway. But anyway, so here's the guy that was the co-founder, says that they were a myth-generating machine. How do you generate a myth? Okay, here's one. Just before the Rio conference, Greenpeace polled about 200 or 300 scientists, okay? Here's what they said. This is what their question was. Do you believe there will be a point of no return if we continue with business as usual? They were talking about global warming. They were talking about if we don't stop the CO2 in the air, and all that kind of stuff, right? That was their question, okay? Only 17%, either 13 or 17%, I think it's 17% of the respondents said yes, that they thought global warming would have an effect. 80-some% said no. Okay? Well, now we go into our myth-generating machine and we generate a myth. Here is the press release that came out. This result reveals as yet a poorly expressed fear among a growing number of climate scientists that global warming could lead not just to severe problems, but to complete ecological collapse. That's when they only got 17% to agree with them. They called them a poorly expressed growing number. Okay? And then they continue to tell you that there's going to be some kind of a disaster. These people are great at making that kind of a statement. Because they didn't lie. Okay? They didn't lie, but they told you just the opposite. So that's what they mean by a myth-generating machine. In Arizona, where I'm from, the Green Party is now a legal party and runs candidates. Okay? Here is a Green Party member from the Green Party in West Germany. We in the Green Movement aspire to a cultural model in which the killing of a forest will be considered more contemptible and more criminal than the sale of 6-year-old children to Asian brothels. Okay? In other words, the heck with the kids, save the tree. I'm sure you've all seen this one here, Ingrid Newkirk. She's the head of PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, one of the animal rights wackos. 6 million Jews died in concentration camps, but 6 billion broiler chickens will die this year in slaughterhouses. She means that. She really does. They all do. They're all nuts. Kenneth Boulding, the originator of Spaceship Earth. The right to have children should be a marketable commodity bought and traded by individuals, but absolutely limited by the state. That sounds pretty good. Let's see if we can go one step further. David Brower, also he was the executive director for Sierra Club a while back. Childbearing should be a punishable crime against society unless the parents hold a government license. All potential parents should be required to use contraceptive chemicals. The government issuing antidotes to citizens chosen for childbearing. Citizens chosen for childbearing. Heil, chosen for childbearing. That really does sound like our little paper hanging friend over there in Germany back in the 30s, doesn't it? What does the media say about this? Ben Bradley, editor of the Washington Post, right here in good old Washington. To hell with the news. I'm no longer interested in news. I'm interested in causes. We don't print the truth. We don't pretend to print the truth. We print what people tell us. It's up to the public to decide what is true. Now you've got your average Joe American, merry American sitting in front of their TV set thinking that they're being told the truth when they're being told causes. Because I guarantee you, you call up any one of your radio stations, any one of your TV stations, take that quote with you and ask them, what is your response to that quote? In one way or another, they'll agree with that quote. One way or another, they will agree with that quote. I've called about 5 stations so far myself, TV stations, and talked to the news director, and every one of them start out saying, oh, well, and end up with. They go right around the circle and come right back to that. That's their business. That's their business. They don't have time to find out if anything's true. In 1989, at the Smithsonian here, they had a conference. The subject was global warming, are we overreacting? The CEOs of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, Time Warner, et cetera, were all there. It was already a padded thing. They already had planned on what their conclusion was going to be. They had all the doomsayers there, people like Paul Ehrlich, who's been saying that we're going to run out of food ever since I can remember when. We were supposed to run out the first time, I think, in the late 60s. And then he said it was going to be in the 80s, and now he's taking it safe. Now he says it's not going to be till mid-21st century. He got smart. Okay? The science editor for Time magazine at that conference, as a result, everything that was discussed and said at that conference said, his name is Charles Alexander, by the way, science editor for Time magazine, said, as science editor of Time, I would freely admit that on this issue we have crossed the boundary from news reporting to advocacy. And I believe that if you call up Time magazine, because I've heard some of their journalists say it on C-SPAN a number of times, they are advocates of the global warming catastrophe. They are not objective about it. And yet, all those people out there that are buying those 2 or 4 million copies of Time magazine every month, whatever it is, or every week, they don't understand that. We saw a film last night called The Greenhouse Conspiracy that blows the legs right out from under the global warming scenario. Okay, it's an excellent video. PBS would not show it nationwide. The public broadcasting system refused to show it nationwide. Discovery Channel bought the rights to it, showed it one time because they had to, and put it on a shelf. The PBS producer who made that decision was questioned as to why they wouldn't show it. Her answer was, I'm not sure it is useful to include every single point of view. Okay? So what she's really saying is the only thing you're going to get are the things that tell you that there's a catastrophe right around the corner. What does our good old president say, or vice president, then senator, say about all this media stuff and scientists? Greg Easterbrook in Green Cassandras was the name of the article in the New Republic, which happens to be kind of a left-leaning magazine, okay? And Greg Easterbrook happens to be a guy that would typically write in favor of the environmental movement. He said, Gore and Paul Ehrlich have ventured into dangerous territory by suggesting that journalists quietly censor environmental evidence that is not alarming because such reports, in Gore's own words, undermine the effort to build a solid base of public support for the difficult actions we must soon take. Now, at that time when he said that, he was a senator. Now he's the vice president of the United States, and I think it's really, it's a hell of a situation when you have a person of that rank saying that we should censor the American people. Because that's exactly what he said. And I guarantee you, he meant it. He means it. He will twist things around. I didn't have time to make a foil of this, but this is a response from Richard Lidson, who is probably the #1 meteorological scientist in the United States with reference to the global warming situation. He was called to committee here, at committee hearings by Senator Gore. In X number of days of testimony, he couldn't get him to say what he wanted to say. So he asked him a bunch of questions. And he answered the questions. Richard Lidson did, because he knew that he had to get Richard Lidson to come over on his side of the fence a little bit, because he was going to report his findings to the Senate floor. Okay? So what he did was he manufactured a few questions with a few answers and made them come out to be what he wanted. In this letter to the editor of the New York Times, Richard Lidson says, Tom Wicker in Time for Action. Mr. Wicker's conclusion that my changed position seems to justify a heightened urgency in responding to threatening atmospheric developments is unwarranted. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read the next part. Senator Albert Gore claimed it was and apparently released extracts of hearings that purported to indicate I had withdrawn my scientific objections. Mr. Wicker was misled. That is a very kind way of saying Al Gore lied, because that's what he did. Okay? Because he knew he had to have this guy's support to try to win some of the rest of the scientific world. The worst part about this whole thing, and that's why I've got Tim Bear started, and that's why I'm starting Beeline Books for the kids, is this right here is an example of what's happening to our kids in school. There was a father in Reno, Nevada, who heard his child, and they got into an argument about what was going on with trees. So he asked his child, he said, where did you learn all this? He says, my teacher told me. He said, the next time she talks about it, take some notes down and bring them to me. 2 weeks later, she showed up for this. When you are as old as I am, the teacher, it will be a major crime to cut them down. Don't cut down trees, because when all the trees are gone, you will probably die, because it gives off oxygen for us to breathe. So if we cut down trees, we won't have oxygen to breathe, so we will die. Now, these are the kind of things that our kids are being taught. I've gone around the state of Arizona. I've interviewed teachers. Now, some of them are real good teachers, et cetera, et cetera. They are trying to do a conscientious job. But the problem is, the only information they get from the media. Okay? They get from the media, they get from the Audubon Society, they get from the Sierra Club, and we've got to do something about that. And which is why I've joined with Odine Hall on trying to distribute Tim Bear, and why I'm creating the series of children's environmental books called the Beeline series, B standing for Balanced Environmental Education. Most of the materials are provided by the environmental groups right now, and we've got to stop that, because our kids literally are being brainwashed on a daily basis, and that's a fact. I guess I'll end with that, but there's always one question. You take, for an example, why in the heck would they want to ban DDT? Why in the heck would they want to ban only synthetic pesticides? Because they supposedly are carcinogenic, and they refuse to accept that there are such things as natural carcinogens. Okay? In an issue of Speak Up America, I pointed out that America's output of the 17 most important food groups, 17 most important food, feed, and fiber crops, increased from 252 million metric tons in the 1938-1940 period to 610 metric tons in the 1978-1980 period, with only a 3% increase in land use. Okay? Our technology, our farming techniques, and pesticides brought that about. What would happen if we got rid of the pesticides? Paul Ehrlich would finally be right. He'd have his famine. And we got to stop that. Thank you very much.